I've been trained in all sorts of personality styles and that sort of thing, but I always felt like I was a failure. I felt like I was broken or defective in some key way. I felt like I was a defective extrovert, for example, because I love people. I love speaking. I was in drama in high school. And yet, when I go to some kind of a social event or to the mall, I'm fine until suddenly, boom, like it's like a switch flips and I've hit a wall. And suddenly I'm like, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to be reduced to a puddle of tears. And it's like, who does that, right?
Are you walking through a storm that feels like it will never end? Do you wonder if life's storms have stolen the beauty from your life for good? You're in the right place. My name is Heather, and like you, I've been through a storm or two and wondered if life would ever be beautiful again. Here we share warriors' words, stories of discovering beauty after battles, and the worth in your wounds. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome, warriors. Cheri Gregory is the founder of the Sensitive and Strong Community Cafe and co-author of 5 books, including Overwhelmed: How to Quiet the Chaos and Restore Your Sanity, and Sensitive and Strong: A Guide for Highly Sensitive Persons and Those Who Love Them. Cheri mentors HSP Christian writers, coaches, and speakers through her Right Beside You one-to-one and group coaching services. She has been married for 38 years to her college sweetheart, Daniel, and they have 2 adult children. Before we hear about Cheri and HSPs, I want to share about the Warrior Words merch on Fourth Wall. And I will put that link in the description for you so that you can just click on it. And if you go to that website, you can now wear your wings or carry your warrior sword with you wherever you go. And if you pick up something, post it on Instagram and tag me at My Warrior Words. Now, grab a tissue and join Cheri and me as we talk about what it means to be a highly sensitive person. Let's rock. Welcome, everyone, to the Warrior Words podcast. We are blessed to have Cheri Gregory here with us today. Welcome, Cheri. How are you today?
Oh, I am great, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yes, I'm so happy that we could make this happen because on a previous episode, I was speaking with a woman named Alyssa Gossett, and she mentioned being highly sensitive. And I said, ooh, I know somebody who talks about that. And I asked her about your book, and she said, yes, when I took that quiz, it saved my life.
Wow.
And we'll talk about the quiz and the book later, but I'd like to start with you sharing what is a highly sensitive person and how did you discover you were one?
Okay, so I'm going to answer. Is it okay if I answer those in reverse order?
Absolutely.
Okay, because for many of us as HSPs, it's all about the story. Like the context is everything. So we are going on probably 12, 13, maybe even 14 years ago that I got an advance copy of Susan Cain's book, Quiet. The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And I handed it to my son, who is a textbook introvert. And he read it in one day and handed it to me. And he said in just this very calm voice, Mom, you need to read this. Now, if it had been my daughter saying that, I would have been like, oh, nothing. But for my son, that's on a scale of 0 to 10, that was his 10. Like that was his, oh, Mom. And so I dropped everything. I was like, oh my goodness, if he's telling me with that level of his urgency that I need to read this book. So I dropped everything and I started reading it. And of course, it's an excellent book. Susan Cain is a wonderful author. But as I was reading it, I got to the chapter where she introduces the research that she did into Dr. Elaine Aron and the highly sensitive person. And I felt like I was reading my autobiography. Like suddenly everything that had never made sense in my life, and I've been trained in all sorts of personality styles and that sort of thing, but I always felt like I was a failure. I felt like I was broken or defective in some key way. I felt like I was a defective extrovert, for example, because I love people. I love speaking. I was in drama in high school. And yet, when I go to some kind of a social event or to the mall, I'm fine until suddenly, boom, like it's like a switch flips and I hit a wall. And suddenly I'm like, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to be reduced to a puddle of tears. And it's like, who does that, right? I mean, at the time, I didn't know. And
Right.
so I'm reading this chapter in Susan Cain's book about Dr. Elaine Aron's research. So of course, I'm like, oh my goodness, this highly sensitive person thing. I relate. I relate. So I got the book, The Highly Sensitive Person. Read it in one setting, felt so validated, saw myself in those pages, and at the same time recognize that I now know this is many of the books on this topic, they go in a direction that is not necessarily consistent with a Christian worldview or a biblical worldview. And so then I went to christianbook.com and I'm like, okay, let me find the Christian books on this topic. And there was none. And so here I am knowing nothing, hardly anything at all about being an HSP. And I'm like, I want to write the book for this because, like I said, I've already been trained in all sorts of things, but this felt like the missing piece for at least a significant percentage of us. And it turns out that 20% of all populations of all species are do have this sensory processing sensitivity. And I have found as a speaker that when I go speak at an event, I think the percentage of those who show up at a church event is actually higher. I think it's more likely to be in the 30, 35, 40%. Because one of the things I can tell you, at least about the HSP Christian women that I interact with, is that we own the self-help shelves of Barnes and Noble. Like we've tried everything we possibly can to fix ourselves. And so I got all excited, and this was, wow, I can't even tell you what year it was. I'm going to say 2013, 2014. I went to a major conference, and I got the interest of several editors, and I even landed an agent on the interest in this topic. But ultimately, all the interest dried up because I don't have a doctorate. I don't have an MFCC or anything like that. And so I was crushed. I was like, there is a need for this topic. There's a need for this book. And then what I discovered over time, God connected me with Denise J. Hughes, who is also an HSP. But unlike me, she's horrified by the term. She will never forgive Dr. Elaine Aron for calling it the highly sensitive person, much like Holly Girth, who has also written a book about introverts, and she also includes information about being an HSP. But instead of highly sensitive person, she calls it a highly perceptive person. And that's what Denise J. Hughes would far prefer have seen, because that word sensitive has such negative connotations for so many people. It's seen as weakness or wussiness or whininess or whatever it might be. And so, what happened between the time I learned that I'm an HSP and became an instant evangelist, thinking, yes, HSP, yay, I started discovering, and God literally started sending women my way who would find out that they were HSP. I mean, we have a mutual friend, Kathy Lip, who would send people my way. She would say, you need to talk to Cheri Gregory. And I never knew why. And then it'd be like, oh, she sent me another HSP. Well, she kept sending me women who didn't want to be an HSP. They were like, HSP, no way. And so that's what I finally came to realize. I couldn't write a book that was shaking pom-poms, just shaking pom-poms about being an HSP. I needed to recognize that for about half of us, we are horrified. We want a cure. We don't want anybody to know. And that's a perfectly valid response to finding out that you're an HSP. So when it came to the book itself, Sensitive and Strong, A Guide for Highly Sensitive Persons and Those Who Love Them, I represent I represent Camp Cheri, which is HSP and Denise represents Camp Denise, which is HSP no way. And like I said, both are very valid responses to finding out that you're an HSP. So that was a lot of me talking and sharing my story. Is there anything you'd like me to clarify or you'd like to fill in?
Well, I happen to I have read the book. Obviously, it's sitting on my side of the table here, and bookmarked. you know, And I think that perspective or having both perspectives in there
Mhm.
is so important. The one thing that I can relate to on that is the autism spectrum.
Mm,
My son is on the spectrum, and we've encountered people who are like, no, I don't want a cure. I love the
yeah,
characteristics of autism.
yeah,
And then others who are like, yes, please,
yeah,
because it is that spectrum.
yeah,
And so I think it helps to have both perspectives in there. And I think you are right saying, no, I can't write the book by myself just waving pom-poms because there is
yeah.
another perspective. So I love that you both did that. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that you mentioned that because my husband's on the autism spectrum.
I
And
think I
we
had
didn't know
heard
that for
that
the,
at some
yeah,
point.
we didn't
Yeah.
know that for the first 20 years of our marriage. And actually, the entire family, when I was reading the book and doing the quiz, I had everybody take it. There's four of us in the family. My daughter is our firstborn, our son is our secondborn. And it turns out we are a poster family for being highly sensitive persons. We just have very different constellations. And so it really helped us understand why, as a whole, we really hang together. We have each other's backs. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty, there's certain situations where we don't understand each other at all. Like, I'm incredibly sensitive, but I'm not as tactilely sensitive, whereas my son actually is tactile. Well, he was tactile defensive as a son, as a child. And so there's all sorts of stories that I could tell about that. But let's go ahead and talk about what it means to be an
Yes,
HSP.
please.
And as
Yes.
I already mentioned, sensory processing sensitivity is kind of the name for it. And so the number one quality of a highly sensitive person is actually something that Dr. Elaine Aron discovered after writing her book initially. Um, and it is that we need time to process. We are very deep, reflective thinkers. And back when I was teaching full time and we'd have a staff meeting, I would become so flustered when they would bring up a new topic and we had little tiny bit of discussion and suddenly we were supposed to vote. And I'm like, what? How am I supposed to even have the slightest idea of what to vote? I haven't even started formulating the questions to ask, let
Hmm.
alone having an idea of, what to think. And, I've also come to find that, I tend to think about the past, I think about the present, and then I extrapolate to the future and I use that for my decision making. Now, sometimes that deep processing can become a thing called rumination. And that ends up being an area in which many HSPs need to gain some skills and some tools. I certainly did. But the reflection that we do, the deep reflection that we do, that is just such a God-given gift. And I've come to really treasure it. The second key quality of a highly sensitive person is that we are easily overstimulated. And when I wrote Sensitive and Strong with Denise, we were only thinking of the exteroception, which is the five senses, right? And like I already
Right.
mentioned, when I taught junior high for years, like the boys would come in from PE and it smelled like they had bathed in Axe body spray. And I mean, I would just my face would turn red, my eyes, I wear contacts, would feel like they were getting goopy. My classroom had no windows, so I got no
Hmm.
ventilation. Like I felt like I was going to die. I would get a headache from the artificial scent. I don't do any artificial scents at all. And so it was so helpful to discover that I wasn't making that up. That's how I'm wired. That's how my brain naturally responds to things. But in addition to the five senses, we actually have a total of eight that we know of. So, in addition to the exteroception, we have vestibular, which is our sense of balance. There's
Hmm.
proprioception, which is where we are in the world. And I have very poor proprioception. I tend to walk into walls and because I turn too soon, about 6 inches too
Okay.
soon. And whenever I hang out with my brother, it turns out that he has the same sort of thing. We both have to learn to compensate and slow down. But then the other one is interoception. And that's something I've really been learning about over the last few years because I was teaching my foundational course, Growing Sensitive and Strong. And we were talking about, the five senses and how we can tend to be easily overstimulated. And
Hmm.
one of the participants asked, well, what about menopause? And I was like, oh, you mean when your body turns into, you become a human volcano and you wake up in a pool of your own sweat? And I had
Yes.
never thought of the fact that we generate our own sensory stimuli from the inside. And that can be
Okay.
very
Yeah.
self-perpetuating. Like when I was younger, I had what I now know to be PMDD. I had horrible menstrual cramps. That was sensory stimuli, but it wasn't something, like on the outside of my skin. That was pain that was coming from the inside of me that would cause everything to tense up, my shoulders, everything. And so I actually had a pretty high pain tolerance, but I also had a body that kept generating all this sensory stimuli, and I had no idea how to deal with any of it. And I don't have any research to support this yet, but I have a suspicion that the eating disorder that I struggled with as a teenager and in my early 20s, I was severely anorexic. I have a suspicion that at least part of that was my body's best attempt to dial down all the sensory stimuli to make me as small as possible. So there was just less to process. At least that's kind of the compassionate way I look at it now. So anyways, so the sensory overstimulation, and then HSPs feel things intensely. Like some people would say we're overly emotional. I would say we have a very vivid palette of emotions and a wide range of emotions. And some of us are externalizers. We express our emotions externally. Some of us are internalizers. And that's another area in which Denise and I, kind of shared the continuum, because I tend to be much more of an externalizer. I will cry at anything. And in fact, as a writer, I know that's how my writing is getting good, is when I can just feel my eyes starting to sting and well up. And for me, that's just such a Holy Spirit moment. Like for me, writing is prayer. And so it just feels like, okay, this is the transformational part. This is where God is revealing something so important to me. And at some point, I can't wait to share it. And so for me, tears have always been a positive, even though I have often been around people for whom they see it as manipulative and negative. And so that's been a hard thing to deal with. But some people don't cry. Some, the myth. If you look at BuzzFeed or Reddit, they do these clickbaity things.
Yes.
How to know if you're an
Yes.
HSP, and like all 27 things have to do with crying. And I'm like, oh, get a life. That is not what it means to be an HSP. Quit making fun of HSPs. That is such a
Yes.
stereotype. So I just want to really emphasize, it is not obligatory to be a crier if you're an HSP. Like that is not like the litmus test, and there's not the club of those who are real HSPs who are known by their tears. No, again, everybody has their own constellation. And one of the places where HSPs get a bad rap, like I said, is for the emotion. And I draw a huge distinction between emotionality and reactivity. There's a huge difference. Reaction is not the same thing as emotion. And we can talk more about that later if you want to, but I had to get that in there. And here's the reason. It's because, when I was newlywed, my husband and I got married at age 21. Don't recommend it, but that's what we did.
My daughter is 22, and she just married her 22-year-old husband. So,
it is a thing. And then we had kids right away. And I never learned what to do with the reactivity that kept showing up in my body, whether it was the big emotions or the big what I now know to be reactions or dysregulation. And so, I married a man who became a pastor. I was a Christian school teacher. I thought something was terribly wrong with me. And I thought it meant I was not close enough to God, that I didn't have the fruits of the Spirit, that I lacked discipline. And so it was a source of incredible shame for me. And so when I found out that I was a highly sensitive person, what it did was it gave me a name for what was going on in my entire system. And then I could start seeking out tools, and I could learn to listen to my body and have sympathy and empathy and compassion for my own self. And I could learn the tools I needed to re-regulate myself. I didn't insist that other people do it for me, but to learn to re-regulate my own self, while also having a great deal of respect for the signals my body was sending me and the messages it was sending me, both through the sensory stimuli, but also through my God-given emotions. So that's why the whole emotion thing is so important to me. The fourth major quality is that HSPs are highly empathetic. And this is a beautiful, beautiful trait. Unfortunately, because of some of the programming and conditioning that we get in our society at large, especially as women, and then within the church, what can end up happening is we can put all of our focus on how others are feeling and no focus whatsoever, no self-awareness of how we ourselves are feeling. And so we can end up basically self-abandoning. And I learned a new term a few weeks ago called self-erasure, which I think is a really spot-on term for women who have spent their lives people-pleasing or going into the trauma response. I mean, I don't care what word you use for it. When
Right.
other people are more important, again, there was a reason for it. Like if my kids were dysregulating, if my husband was dysregulating and or showing distress or whatever you want to call it, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't have the skills. So I had to dial them down so that I could feel okay. And so learning to differentiate, learning that they can have their feelings and I can still be okay.
Yes.
And I can also be empathetic. In fact, isn't it Brene Brown who says that those who have the most compassion for others also have the best boundaries. And so that's been another journey
Yeah.
that I've been able to take because I learned that I'm an HSP. And then last but not least is that HSPs notice nuances. And, it could be little things like a scent or a particular nuance of flavor. But it also can be things like, going to a museum and really drinking in the beautiful artwork or going out into nature and noticing the interplay of colors or the sounds of the birds. Or it could be going to somebody's home and recognizing, the kinds of things they collect and, giving them something similar, something to add to their collection for Christmas that year. And so HSPs will often notice little things, and we're especially good at circling back around. Personally, I'm not good in the moment if something is going wrong or if somebody has a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more likely to pull back because I don't want to become overwhelmed by that. But I and many HSPs are really good at circling back around weeks later, months later, years later, to listen for the nuances, to notice whether that person is making some form of a comeback or they're still staying, withdrawn or whatever it might be. And so that's another area in which I used to feel like because I couldn't show up for people, I'm not an ambulance driver. Like you do not want me to try to play that role in anybody's life. I also wouldn't never go to the mission field. I would be a liability. I always joke that if I had been in a covered wagon and, they had made it as far as Death Valley and they had to choose, to throw something out, they would have thrown me out and they would keep the sewing machine. And it would be the right choice, right? Like I am not that go-to person.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also the person who's not going to forget. I'm also the person who's not going to expect people to have suddenly moved on because 3 months have passed or whatever. And so that ability to notice something and tuck it away and then circle back around because of noticing it, I think is a huge gift. So that, in not so small a nutshell, is what it means, are some of the basic key things of what it means to be a highly sensitive person.
Well, I thank you for the explanation on that, because it explains a few things about me. It
Do
explains a few
tell.
things. It explains a few things about people in my family.
Yes.
Those I won't necessarily tell, but
But you
because
get to
it's
tell your
their
story.
because yes, because
Yes.
their story is not mine. And you know, you mentioned though about the nuances,
Yeah.
and I do tend to notice those things. I may not be as good as circling back,
Hmm.
but I do tend to notice those things
Hmm.
and the emotion. I am a crier. Both of my kids have made fun of me on multiple occasions. There was a Folgers commercial many years back where
Uh-huh.
this woman wakes up and she smells the coffee and she walks downstairs and her son has returned from some service in the military and she gets all she cries and I cry. I'm like, I'm
Of course.
crying over coffee.
No, no,
You
you're
know,
crying over a reunion. You're feeling
like,
well, and here's the thing. It's because we have more mirror neurons, and they are always on alert. They are always active. They don't take time off. They don't sleep. We're constantly feeling what other people are feeling. So that's a great illustration.
yes, that's happened to me multiple times. I mean, I even remember my breast cancer was hormone positive, so they put me on hormone blockers. I have 3 months left, but they put me on these hormone blockers, and one of my first questions was, "Well, will it take away my femininity, my emotionality, my
Yeah.
sensitivity,
Yeah.
and it didn't. It didn't because I still cry. Um, and I do. I cry. I get emotional. I feel all the emotions and I
Yeah.
feel them with depth as
Hmm.
opposed to just surface. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm more internal and sometimes I find I'm more external.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's defense mechanism, like I will, internalize it so that I don't have to cry in front of people or I don't have to get emotional. So maybe
It probably depends on either how safe you feel in the moment and or what your resource level is in the moment. Like if
mhm.
you feel completely depleted, where you don't even have the energy for what I would call a good cry, then you may need to wait for another time, as opposed to if you're like, okay, I'm in a safe environment, there's nobody who's going to really mock me, there's no danger of me worrying anybody to death. Then it can be it can feel much freer at that point in time to have what I would, for me, is the catharsis of a good cry
Mhm.
and the really listening to, what signals the body is sending.
Well, I know at least in my home, my son still lives with me and it's
Hmm.
just the two of us.
Hmm.
And he is being on the autism spectrum. I am one of the very few people he has developed empathy
Hmm.
with or for.
Hmm.
And when I am upset, he gets like double upset
Yes.
because
Yes.
I am upset.
Yes.
And so I
Hmm.
notice that I do tend to hide some of those things
Oh,
until
yeah.
maybe I'm behind closed doors and um because he doesn't need to know every single emotion or
Yeah.
every single reason. I need him to feel safe as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But getting back to what you said, that reminds me of, the empathy for others and the self
Yes.
erasure,
Yeah.
um, because while I'm not actually erasing myself, I do find that I purposefully will hide an emotion here and there
Hmm.
to make things better for him.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I'm
Well,
learning more and more about my levels now.
well, here's the thing though, okay? Because one of my not so secret agendas in um, learning about more about being an HSP, writing the book Sensitive and Strong, and then the program that I do, Growing Sensitive and Strong, is to make sure that HSPs find out that among all of the things that can be perceived as drawbacks and challenges when it comes to being an HSP. Because honestly, the fact that I get a raging headache when I'm around artificial scent is it's not convenient. I can't tell
Right.
other people what to put on their body or not how not to how to wash their clothes or whatever.
Mhm.
And I don't like popping a bunch of ibuprofen when I have a headache. So that's a challenge, right? But one of the huge benefits is that we are wired for servant leadership. I have a master's in leadership, and I'm completing my doctorate in leadership. And servant leadership is the one that I'm really focused in on. There's authentic leadership and servant leadership. And so empathy is one of the key qualities, one of the most important parts of servant leadership that cannot really be taught. And so that's just hugely important. And then in authentic leadership, one of my favorite articles about authentic leadership points out that authenticity and authentic leadership doesn't mean you just show up and let it all hang out however you feel in the moment. It is realizing that we are multifaceted individuals and we can choose which facet to kind of put forward at any point in time. And they gave the illustration of somebody, let's say she's the head of a company, right? And so if it's the end of the year report, her photo in that report she might have her in a suit in her office, but then her Christmas card might have a picture of her and her family in matching sweaters or pajamas with the animals, and then let's say she's an avid rock climber. Then let's say a sports magazine decides to do a feature on her. Then it would be appropriate for her to be in a photo where she's in full gear and she's rappelling off of some rock face.
Right.
Which one of those photos is the real person? Well, of course, the answer is each one is. It's just a different facet of
Right.
her. And then the importance is which facet is going to match with the needs of the current situation, which is where servant leadership comes in and says, I'm going to read the situation. I'm going to use that empathy to see what's needed. And we're going to fill in. And that's where the noticing nuances comes in so beautifully. So what I hear you illustrating here is that you recognize what the needs of the situation are. You are being authentic, that you know that the tears are coming up or whatever, but you also know that your son doesn't need to have mom have a full-on meltdown. And
Right.
so you are dialing it down for his benefit, for your benefit, and you have other timing and other tools that would be appropriate for that. So what I'm hearing is called self-leadership. So
Okay, I like that better. I'll take that title. Wear it proudly. So, now you mentioned something else too that you said we could come back to, and that was the emotion part, because I think that's
Yes.
where I tend to be most highly sensitive is
Yeah.
in that emotion. And you mentioned the reactionary
Yes. Reactivity
versus
versus
reactivity.
emotionality.
Hmm. Do you want
Yes.
to dive into that a little bit,
Oh,
because that
absolutely.
because that
Absolutely. Well,
interests me. Yeah.
yeah, well, and this was one of those areas where, and I'm not saying all HSPs were raised the same way. I just happened to have been raised in a very intellectual family. And, I'm not going to blame it all on the fact that I'm half German, but, I'm just going to say that emotions were verboten when I was growing up. Like it was, we deified reason and we demonized emotion. Like that was very clear.
Hmm.
And again, emotion was seen as weak and as evidence of that you'd lost control, and it was an embarrassment to the family. And I was a perfectionist, which is actually the dark side of being a deep processor, is processing so much that we overthink. Many HSPs can be overthinkers and get stuck in perfectionism and get stuck in, like I said, ruminating. And so that reactivity, recognizing that, hang on a second, my body is going into some kind of a state of just kind of like, well, I don't know what's going on. Like when I would have these huge meltdowns, I mean like the really embarrassing, ugly cry, snot everywhere kind of, full on meltdown. I couldn't have named an emotion to save my life. I don't even think I could have told you I was sad, and it really wasn't sad. It was I again, it wasn't an actual emotion, because what it was a physical state. It was just this full on dysregulation where I couldn't even really recognize who I was. And I sometimes think of it as the whole Dr. Bruce Banner versus the
Hmm.
Incredible Hulk kind of thing.
Yeah.
Only it wasn't because I was angry. It was because, and this was so key to finally start having some empathy for myself, some self compassion. It was because I was massively overstimulated. Both the external stimulation, both the mental stimulation of overthinking things, the internal, like I already mentioned, the interoception, because what's going on in our heads often causes our shoulders to start hunching up and our stomachs to start twisting. And so all of these things, I had no bodily awareness. I wasn't I was feeling the result of them, but I wasn't aware what was happening early on. And so I would have the full on meltdown, having missed all the cues that was coming on. And then, like I said, I would just feel like this complete and utter failure. And then I would be labeled emotional. And it was like, no, no, my body was trying to send me signals. And for the longest time, I used to joke that I was a head on a stick. I no longer joke that anymore. It's not funny. I am working as gently as possible. I almost said as hard as possible. I am working as gently as possible to live a much more embodied life, where when that tightening shows up in my gut, I can say, okay, I'm listening. What are you trying to tell me? Is this fear? Is this dread? Is this, loneliness? Is this, and I'll pull out my feel wheel. I literally have this big, beautiful, it's on kind of a sturdy metal of the
Mhm.
emotions, and it has in the center, it has the basic emotions, and then it has two concentric circles.
Yes, I've
And
seen
I'll
those.
sit
Yes.
down with that. And here's the thing. I was raised with the belief, and I have seen so much teaching in Christian circles, that if we start listening to our emotions, they will take over and ruin our lives. So don't let them even start to have a foothold. And what I've discovered is the exact opposite. What I've discovered is when I'm like, okay, something's wrong. Okay, thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, I think this is a thumbs down feeling. Okay. I think it's a form of sadness. Okay, I think it's a form of loneliness. Okay, I think it's, I'm feeling isolated. Oh, I'm feeling rejected. When I can get down to that granular level and realize, oh, it's associated with, a group of people getting together and I wasn't invited and I wish I had been, but it felt, now I have something I can pray about. Now I can go to God and I can be like, well, what do I do with this? Now, of course, I could have gone to God with the blah, because we can always go to him. Like the Psalms
Exactly.
are just
Yes.
beautiful proof of that. I don't ever want to imply that we can't. But I feel like much more of an integrated person because the meltdown is just the brainstem, right? It's just really, I'm out of my prefrontal cortex. I'm just down to the most primal reaction because I wasn't listening. Now, when I can be going and naming the emotions, which that does keep us in our prefrontal cortex because it requires language to go
Mm-hmm.
through those granularity of emotions. And so that actually keeps us renewing our mind and keeps us in our rational brain, even though we are thinking about emotions. But then I can really open myself to the Holy Spirit and say, is there something I need to know here? Is this an area in which it's really completely legitimate for me to feel this way? Or am I telling myself a story that I really need to change the narrative and realize that nobody was thinking about me at all? Nobody meant to reject me. And now I can change how I'm feeling, not by rejecting my emotions or beating them up as bad, but by gently leading them and saying, wow, something about this reminded me of sixth grade when two girls whose names I still remember, but I will not say out loud, wrote a note that said, we don't like Cheri Elder today, and they passed that note around. I can have compassion for sixth grade Cheri even as 58-year-old Cheri is like, yeah, we're not her anymore. We're going to take really good care of her today. No, we're not going to go check out the freezer and see if our two best friends, Ben and Jerry's, are there because we don't need that. Ben and Jerry aren't going to rescue us. We can read some Psalms. We can go take a swim. I now have two new kittens I've had for 4 months. I can sit down and
Oh.
pet them, and they're so co-regulating. Their purrs, are just, and their fur is just, I mean, you can see me with my fingers here, the texture is
Mm-hmm.
so comforting, right? And I can take really good, gentle care of myself. I mean, the gentleness of Jesus has become so meaningful to me in just the last few years. Letting the gentleness of Jesus really speak to my safety seeking soul. And so all of that has to do with recognizing what is going on inside. And what I just described to you can happen in less than 5 minutes. I don't need a whole day. It used to take me days, weeks, even months to recover from a full on meltdown because of all the shame that I'd be dealing with afterwards.
Right. Right.
And so the research is really clear now that actually naming our emotions at a granular level is one of the keys to resilience. And I could not be more excited that social psychology has shown that to be true. Because I used to believe the whole toughness, you just, suck it up, buttercup, and white knuckle it the way through. And it
Mm-hmm.
turns out none of that actually works long term for most people, and especially not for HSPs.
Well, I love that. I love that you brought up the emotions, the emotion wheel,
Yes.
because I think a lot of us grow up with happiness,
Hmm.
anger,
Hmm.
sadness.
Yep.
Maybe there's more, but those are the
Yeah.
three basics that we grow up thinking about. But as you so well illustrated, you can get down to, okay, well, maybe it's not just sadness, it's loneliness. And oh,
Mhm.
well, why am I lonely? And I feel like I was rejected.
Yeah.
And things do make much more sense.
Yes.
I do remember, I think it was in college, because I have a bachelor's in psychology with a minor in sociology. So I had
I
all of that,
love
all of
it.
those brain classes. And I
Yes.
do remember being taught that anger was never really anger, that
Mm.
anger itself could be, but they never went any further than that. And so
Yeah.
since I am very close to that 58 you mentioned at 56, um, this was a long time ago. And as you said,
Yeah.
the research is now
Yeah.
catching up. So, nobody ever broke it down, sadness or happiness
Yes.
but they did tell me, I think saying anger was four different emotions and
Mm-hmm.
sadness was one of them. So we're using
Yeah.
it in the definition of something else. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and of course, now you're going to make, I have to mention my two favorite movies, Inside Out and Inside Out 2,
I haven't seen the
because
second one yet, but
it's so good. Oh my word. I just saw it again with my brother who's an MFCC and my sister-in-law. And it introduces anxiety and really takes such a compassionate look at what anxiety tries to do for us. It can't succeed. But there is a particularly poignant scene in which it shows how our imaginations can be turned against us in this overthinking and rumination. And I'm going to stop talking about it because otherwise I'll tear up, because it was so beautiful to see it portrayed. And I just thought about all the young children, teenagers, early 20 somethings. I mean, just all the people who are going to have vocabulary now for what it means to be dysregulating or overthinking or ruminating or having an anxiety attack or whatever you want to call it. They're going to have language for it, and they're going to recognize, oh, I'm not the only one this happens to. I saw it in this movie. I saw it resolved. I saw it given names and words. And, for me, I am such a geek when it comes to terminology, because when I have a word for it, when I have a phrase for it, then I'm like, okay, now I can sink my teeth into it. I know what it is. It's not just this thing that's kind of floating around happening to me. I feel like I now have agency. And, some people have accused me of, well, you're just creating this whole new victim culture. And I'm like, you do not understand my people. My people are the hardest working people I know. That's why we own the self-help shelf of Barnes and Noble, is because we want to get better. We want to become exactly who God created us to be. And by the way, I also don't believe that being an HSP is a superpower. I know it can be fun to say that and champion it, but I'm just not here to do the comparison game at all. We are wired the way we are. I always like to say wired on purpose for his purpose. God chose to make some of us
yes.
HSPs and other people non-HSPs, and that's fine. I'm not saying we're better than anybody else. But when it comes to things like self-care, which is its own fraught topic, but when it comes to
Right.
self-stewardship, how about I use the word stewardship? That's the
Stewardship.
word that
Yes.
Denise uses in the book. I have met so many HSPs who, because they thought they were broken, because they thought they were defective, they quit taking care of themselves. Because why would you care for something that is useless or fatally flawed? And so learning that no, we really are wired this way on purpose has given so many women permission to start listening to their body's needs and paying attention, and then meeting the basic, and we're talking basic needs here. I'm not talking about 10 spa days a month or whatever, which, the whole phrase self-care has got so many meanings to it. I'm talking
Yeah.
about actually going to the dental appointments and
Hmm.
eating nutritious meals and getting enough sleep and all that kind of stuff. And when HSPs do that, we are able to thrive in ways that we didn't think were possible. There is the concept of differential susceptibility, which I know is such a mouthful of a term. But again, it brought me so much hope when I learned it. And what that simply means is that one of the drawbacks to being a highly sensitive person is that we do tend to do poorly in non-nurturing environments. Like, we will wilt faster than almost anybody else in a high stress, overstimulating environment or non-nurturing environment. But the flip side is also true. We will respond more than the average person to interventions, to nurture, to learning, to intentional growth that we aim for ourselves. And so it's not just the bad news that, oh, well, we have a hard time with bright lights. I can always, not always, but I can almost always spot the HSPs when I'm coming out of like a church setting or something, because everybody else is just going to their cars and all of the HSPs are digging in their purse for their sunglasses because we don't want to have a blinding headache, right? And so, yeah, that's the drawback of being an HSP. But the positive is that we are wired to learn and grow, and we are highly motivated to do so. And we can often make huge strides compared to others. And we can surprise even ourselves with that ability to learn and grow. And, I look back, and I was telling you earlier in this conversation, about having these full-on meltdowns. And I was thinking to myself in the back of my mind, which is always going, I was like, when was
Yes.
the last time I had one of those? And I honestly cannot remember. And that feels pretty good. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't had a hard cry, but not the
Right.
kind where I was like, what on earth is happening to me? I can't get a grip. I can't get control. And that's a miracle. Okay. I just want to be clear. That is not anything I did for myself. That is the miracle of the journey that God has taken me on.
Right.
And I'm just so grateful to have had the information and the tools that have been part of that transformation.
Well, I think what you just said right there is it totally debunks the you're just creating a new victim
Hmm.
class because victims will stay there.
Mm-mm.
Victims will continue to open that freezer door and look for that pint of chocolate goodness, which I've been known to do.
How did you know
Uh,
it was chocolate, Heather? How did you know?
oh, maybe because that's my own confession, my own guilt.
Hmm.
Um, but so that's where the victim mentality would stay.
Yeah,
And what you're talking about is, okay, I'm accepting that I have this characteristic or this characteristic. I've learned this about myself,
yeah,
and I'm now going to use that knowledge
yeah,
and I'm going to move forward
yeah,
because as you just confirmed for us, it's been a while since you've had one of those
yeah,
meltdowns because you're
yeah,
learning and you're growing.
yeah.
And that's just beautiful. And I wanted to ask about that too. If you've mentioned several little nuggets here, or big ones too, but you've mentioned several things. But if you had to pick your favorite beauty, your favorite
Mm,
nugget, your favorite gem out of this journey of
mm,
discovering what a highly sensitive person is and then how to
mm,
improve your own life,
mm.
what would be your favorite beautiful moment or your beautiful nugget out of that?
It would have to be a message that I got from one of the Sensitive and Strong Community Cafe members. I run a membership. It's small, but we're
Mhm.
very close for highly sensitive Christian women. And it was a young woman who just got back from traveling with a particular group. And one of the members of the group was a young man that she's known for a while. And she just started noticing some things about him. And because she knew him well enough, she was kind of in a mentor role to him.
Mhm.
She kind of approached the question of whether he might be a highly sensitive person and then made the quiz available to him and then shared with him some information. And he was from Uganda. And so, he started watching some of the videos and getting to know it. And he sent her the most beautiful messages of appreciation. He thought he had a character defect. He thought that his character was inherently flawed. And when he discovered that he's a highly sensitive person, the amount of hope that that gave him, he felt so validated and he felt just like so much was now suddenly open to him. And he didn't use the word broken, but in his own words, that's what he was saying. And I
Mhm.
thought to myself, oh my goodness. So this young woman had owned being an HSP for herself and then was perceptive enough to share with this young man on a bus in England, somebody I would never in a million years meet. And his life is not just a little bit better. He feels like he has this whole new perspective on who he is. And what could be more beautiful? What could
Yes.
be more beautiful than to go from trying so hard and still feeling despair? Like, no matter how hard I try, I never get any better. Nothing seems to work, to feeling hopeful and feeling that sense of personal responsibility and agency, but not in a heavy way, in an exciting way that says, oh, I can change, I can learn, I can grow, and I now understand that pieces all fit. I make sense, maybe not to everybody else, but I make sense to
Yes.
me and I make sense to God. And honestly, for most of our lives, that needs to be enough. If we make sense occasionally to other people, that's kind of, frosting on the cake. But if we make sense to God because He made us this way and we make sense to ourselves, there's just so much hope that is possible. And so much of the weight that many of us have felt of being an HSP, it really starts to lift and is replaced by a sense of peace and confidence, not self confidence so much as my friend Amy Carroll likes to call it Godfidence, right? And then we start to really develop a really healthy form of self compassion. And my definition of self compassion is simply receiving, choosing to fully receive God's grace for myself. And when we have self compassion, that's when we have compassion for others as well. So, yeah, that's what I would say it would be.
Well, when you told the story and started talking about his realizations, I got chills.
Nothing better.
I
Nothing better
love
to
that.
know other people's lives are being changed in a similar way. That's just the
Yes.
best, the best, the best, the best.
Well, you mentioned the quiz, and I mentioned the quiz very early on
hmm
in the conversation here. So tell us about this quiz and where we can find it.
Yeah. So the easiest way to do it is to go to sensitiveandstrong.com/join, and you just fill in your email address and you'll get an email. It has a PDF. I like the PDF version of the quiz best. There is an online version, which I'm happy to give you the link to, Heather, and you can add that to things. But the PDF version is much more nuanced. And the number of people who have emailed me and just thanked me for the questions on the quiz, because they said the fact that the question was even there meant they weren't crazy. And
Mm,
so I like I'm an old-fashioned girl. I kill trees. I'm so sorry. But I'm a former English teacher. And as a writer, I just like things printed. So it's like I said, it's a PDF quiz. It doesn't take long to take, but I think it's really satisfying to print it out and kind of go through and mark things and total it all up and kind of see what the score is. And, the closer to 100, the more likely it is that someone's a highly sensitive person. So yeah, that's super easily available. And many people do take it for themselves and then they start printing out more copies to share with friends and family and have all sorts
yes.
of fun with that.
Well, wonderful. And where can people find you? You've mentioned your Sensitive and Strong Cafe, and just where can people come learn more about Cheri and the work you're doing?
Probably the best place is sensitiveandstrong.com. And I do blog there still. I know blogging is kind of an old word, but I just wrote a blog post about what I learned about being sensitive and strong from Tom Brady,
Oh,
the
wow.
record-breaking NFL quarterback. Yes, I'm very proud of this one. It was very unexpected, but it was also very cool. And there's all sorts of information there. There's information about the cafe. And then also at cherigregory.com/podcast is Grit and Grace, which is the podcast I used to do with Amy Carroll for many years. And now I've shifted to doing it solo. And it is the podcast, Grit and Grace, the podcast for highly sensitive Christian women. So I probably do 2 or 3 episodes a month there.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question before
Yeah.
we close this out. And if there is somebody listening
Mm,
who maybe feels broken or
yeah.
feels that, there's something wrong with them, that they were made
Mm,
wrong,
mm,
what would you say to them to encourage them?
mm. I would say, I know how that feels. I know what it's like to work your hardest to get better and to not only not get better, but to feel like you're making things worse. Like the harder you work, the worse things actually get, and how frustrating that is. And I also know the relief of finally having a name for what's actually going on. In this case, it happens to be being a highly sensitive person, or if you'd prefer, highly perceptive person. Um, and to recognize that these qualities have always been a part of who you are. And so it's less about working hard to become somebody different, like who other people might expect you to be. And that, okay, what I'm about to say may sound fantastical, but this is what I found to be true over the years. Simply giving yourself the permission to be the person God actually created you to be. Um, Sensitive, by which I mean nose, sensitive and all. So, I'm the person who can't stand the smell of Axe body spray, you know, but to be the kind of person who notices things and who tears up at a Folgers commercial, right? And who notices nuances and who empathizes with others, to let yourself become that kind of person. That is going to be the thing. Becoming who God created you to be is going to be the thing that actually gets you what you were trying so hard to do all along. And this is going to sound unbelievable. I almost don't believe it myself, but I've been living it for like 12, 13 years. Just showing up as yourself, just showing up as you is the absolute best thing that you can do. And it feels so amazing to not try so hard, to not work so hard, and to take all of that energy that was getting diverted into these futile efforts, and to put all that energy into showing up and saying, okay, Lord, who are you going to put in my path today? Who do you want me to reach today? What are you and I going to do today? And to trust that He did create you and wire you this way on purpose for His purpose, and not worry about the rest. That's what I would say.
Amen. Oh, well, thank you. I think just simply giving somebody the permission to be who they are
Oh my
and who
word,
God
yes.
created them to be can
Yep.
be, that's just so freeing.
Yep.
So freeing.
Yep.
And so I thank you. I thank you for your time, for the education, for giving us language, for giving us words to use, because I think that was a big component of this. Is just having the words to explain maybe something that somebody's feeling that they didn't know. So
Makes all the difference in the world.
yes. So thank you so much for your time
Oh, thank you.
and
And
for
again,
sharing.
hang on a second. I got to do this because I do keep these here. I use them in the cafe all the time. We have to do pom-poms, but we actually did it, Heather. We did it. Third time, fourth time, fifth time, 6,000th time is the charm.
Yes, yes, yes. Very good. And I love the pom poms. So perfect way to end. All right.
All righty.
Thank you,
All right.
Cheri.
You take care, Heather.
The gentleness of Jesus. I loved that phrase when Cheri used it. And I was thinking, if Jesus can be gentle with us, why can't we be gentle with ourselves? After listening to Cheri and thinking on my own experiences, I think it boils down to something Cheri and I discussed right at the end, and that is language. Throughout our conversation, Cheri gave us language to use. We're not broken. We're designed this way by God on purpose for His purpose. We no longer have to feel like failures or that we don't fit in because maybe we feel empathy or we react to lights and scents or experience deep emotions. When we have words to express what we're feeling or what we are experiencing, these words empower us and propel us to learn and improve those aspects that we can. And that leads me to something else I really appreciated, and that was the perspective that Cheri provided for HSPs who want to own it and for those who want to disown it. Not only did she encourage us to be who we are, but she gave us the understanding to acknowledge that both of those perspectives are equally okay. So, pom-poms or not, allow yourself to be who God created you to be. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. Give yourself permission to show up in the world as yourself. Be gentle with yourself as Jesus is with you. What's one way you can be more gentle with yourself? Something to think about this week. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.